Good morning. This is Ron. It is Monday, April the 16th. Welcome to Story Time. Okay, and today there's going to be three segments to the show. Segment number one is from Ayn Rand's book, Philosophy, Who Needs It? And it's part two of chapter 14, The Establishing of an Establishment. And then part two is going to be, or section two is going to be, reading from the app from rushlimbaugh.com and doing a little critique. And then lastly, some jokes. So today we're going to be picking up part two of Establishing an Establishment. And the chapter is basically talking about how you don't have to have government suppression in order to be able to suppress new ideas or free speech, that you can have it by the opposite direction, by having the government become an official creator of a particular type of orthodoxy. And the creation of that particular orthodoxy then spreads throughout the country and acts as a way of, again, tamping down on free speech. So, part two. Ironically enough, it is the New Republic that offered an indication of the mechanics by which an establishment gets established, apparently without realizing the social implications of its own argument. Objecting to Gallagher's contention that a deliberate policy may be favoring the behaviorist school of psychology, the New Republic stated, quote, "The Gallagher account did not note that Skinner Grant was one of 20 senior research career awards, that is, plums for scientific leaders in mental health across the board, rather than a unique grant. No new awards of this kind have been made by the National Institutes of Mental Health since 1964, but 18 of them, which were originally for 5 years, have been renewed. Skinner's was renewed in 1969. So his $283,000 amounts to $28,300 a year, ending in 1974. Skinner has continued to teach roughly one seminar a year at Harvard since 1964. In other words, his Harvard salary will be paid by the feds until 1974. A bonanza perhaps more rewarding to Harvard than to him, since he could command at least as large a salary in a number of other places." Unquote. Consider the desperate financial plight of private universities, then ask yourself what a bonanza of this kind will do to them. It is generally known that most universities now depend on government research projects as one of their major sources of income. The government grants to those senior researchers establish every recipient as an unofficial power. It is his influence, his ideas, his theories, his preferences in faculty hiring that will come to dominate the school in a silent, unadmitted way. What debt-ridden college administrator would dare antagonize the carrier of the bonanza? Now observe that these grants were given to senior researchers, that they were plums, as the New York Republic calls them coyly and cynically, for scientific leaders. How would Washington bureaucrats, or congressmen for that matter, know which scientists to encourage, particularly in so controversial a field as social science? The safest method is to choose men who have achieved some sort of reputation. Whether their reputation is deserved or not, whether their achievements are valid or not, whether they rose by merit, pull, publicity, or accident, are questions which the awarders do not and cannot consider. When personal judgment is inoperative or forbidden, men's first concern is not how to choose, but how to justify their choice. Time will necessarily prompt committee members, bureaucrats, and politicians to gravitate toward prestigious names. The result is to help establish those already established, i.e., to entrench the status quo. The worst part of this fact is that this method of selection is not confined to the cowardly or the corrupt, that the honest official is obliged to use it. The method is forced on him by the terms of the situation. To pass an informed, independent judgment on the value of every applicant or project in every field of science, an official would have to be a universal scholar. If he consults experts in the field, the dilemma remains. Either he has to be a scholar who knows which experts to consult, or he has to surrender his judgment to men trained by the very professors he is supposed to judge. The awarding of grants to famous leaders, therefore, appears to him as the only fair policy, on the premise that somebody made them famous, somebody knows, even if I don't. If the officials attempted to bypass the leaders and give grants to promising beginners, the injustice and irrationality of the situation would be so much worse that most of them have the good sense not to attempt it. If universal scholarship is required to judge the value of the actual in every field, nothing short of omniscience would be required to judge the value of the potential, as various privately sponsored contests to discover future talent, even in limited fields, have amply demonstrated. Furthermore, the terms of the situation actually forbid an honest official to use his own judgment. He is supposed to be impartial and fair while considering awards in the social sciences. An official who does not have some knowledge and some conviction in this field has no moral right to be a public official. Yet the kind of fairness demanded of him means that he must suspend, ignore, or evade his own convictions. These would be challenged as prejudices or censorship, and proceed to dispose of large sums of public money with incalculable consequences for the future of the country, without judging the nature of the recipient's ideas, i.e., without using any judgment whatsoever. The awarders may hide behind the notion that in choosing recognized leaders, they are acting democratically and rewarding men chosen by the public. But there is no democracy in this field. Science and the mind do not work by vote or by consensus. The best known is not necessarily the best, nor is the least known, for that matter. Since no rational standards are applicable, the awarder's method leads to concern with personalities, not ideas, pull, not merit, prestige, not truth. The result is rule by press agents. The profiteers of government grants are usually among the loudest protesters against, quote, the tyranny of money, unquote. Science and the culture, they cry, must be liberated from the arbitrary private power of the rich. But there is this difference. The rich can neither buy an entire nation nor force one single individual. If a rich man chooses to support cultural activities, he can do so only on a very limited scale, and he bears the consequences of his actions. If he does not use his judgment but merely indulges his irrational whims, he achieves the opposite of his intention. His projects and his protégés are ignored or despised in their professions, and no amount of money will buy him any influence over the culture. Like vanity publishing, his venture remains a private waste without any wider significance. The culture is protected from him by three invincible elements: choice, variety, competition. If he loses his money in foolish ventures, he hurts no one but himself. And above all, the money he spends is his own. It is not extorted by force from unwilling victims. The fundamental evil of government grants is the fact that men are forced to pay for the support of ideas diametrically opposed to their own. This is a profound violation of an individual's integrity and conscience. It is viciously wrong to take the money of rational men for the support of B.F. Skinner, or vice versa. The Constitution forbids a governmental establishment of religion, properly regarding it as a violation of individual rights. Since its man's beliefs are protected from the intrusion of force, the same principle should protect his reasoned convictions and forbid governmental establishments in the field of thought. Socially, the most destructive consequences of tyranny are spread by an indeterminate, unofficial class of rulers, the official favorites. In the history of absolute monarchies, it was the king's favorites who perpetrated the worst iniquities. Even an absolute monarch was restrained to some minimal extent by the necessity to pretend to maintain some semblance of justice, in order to protect his image from the people's indignation. But the recipients of his arbitrary, capricious favor held all the privileges of power without any of the restraints. It was among the scrambling, conniving, boot-licking, backstabbing climbers of a royal court that the worst exponents of power for power's sake were to be found. This holds true in any political system that leaves an opportunity open to them. In an absolute monarchy, in a total totalitarian dictatorship, in a mixed economy. Today, what we see in this country's intellectual field is one of the worst manifestations of political power, ruled by favorites, by the unofficially privileged, by private groups with governmental power but without governmental responsibility. They are shifting, switching groups, often feuding among themselves but united against outsiders. They are scrambling to catch momentary favors, their precise status unknown to their members, their rivals, or their particular patrons among the hundreds of congressmen and thousands of bureaucrats who are now bewildered and intimidated by these Frankensteinian creatures. As in any other game devoid of objective rules, success and power in this one depend on barkers, press agents, and bluff. So, what I wanted to say on this one, first of all, the very end here about bluff. The left does this constantly. They bluff constantly. They will talk to you in ways that make it seem as though they know more than you do, or know more about a particular subject, and then that can be intimidating. You don't want to argue with them because you're afraid that they're going to pull some facts or figures out of their hat and end up winning the argument. Also, let's see. Indeterminate official classes of rules, the official favorites. It was the king's favorites. Let's see, is one of the worst. Ruled by favorites, by private groups. That was it. Again, the private groups with governmental power but without governmental responsibility. That's the other thing, that when the left is looking for power, they're not looking for the same kind of power that the right looks for. The right looks for power, legitimate power. And what the left is always looking to do is to be tyrannical, to be tyrants. Tyranny is the exercise of power that rightfully belongs to no one. And the kind of power that rightfully belongs to no one is the kind of power that in which there is no responsibility. It's called operating with impunity. They don't have to worry about suffering any consequences. They make make a decree or ask that something be done, and then if it goes wrong, they just walk away instead of having to go ahead and clean up the mess. And that's also what the left is constantly looking for. Look at any situation like in what's going on in Venezuela or Cuba, any socialist country these days, and you'll see a lot of that, where the people in power exercise power and authority, and then when it comes time to clean up messes, they just simply ignore it and walk away, leave it for somebody else. So. And that's the end of part 2 of chapter 14, the establishing of an establishment. And when I come back, I will be reading a little segment from Rush Limbaugh and issuing a critique. Hold on. Okay, and I'm back. And so today it's going to be from April 12th, which was last Thursday. It's a transcript from the Rush Limbaugh show. And so it starts, it starts, in the meantime, there remains something that's true each and every day. There are two Americas. There's the America that's functioning out there, the people that get up and go to work every day and do their jobs. And then there's the America that the media presents to us each and every day, and very little in common exists between the two. And so, I so astutely, and if I might say brilliantly, observed yesterday, if you do nothing but have a steady diet of the media, and you happen to be a Republican or conservative, you probably by now are convinced it's over, not just for the midterms, but forever. You may as well just admit it and stop caring about any of this and try to live your life without having any of this affect you, and stop worrying about what's happening to the country, because we've lost the country. Just a matter of time. We're going to officially lose the country in November when the blue wave sweeps us all out to sea. But then if you look over here at the country where the people are getting up and going to work every day, you see an entirely different picture. For example, jobless claims, only 233,000 last week. That means that jobless claims have been held below 300,000 for 162 consecutive weeks. That's the longest streak for weekly records dating back to 67. In other words, the employment situation is so dramatically improved out there, and yet nobody is talking about it. Drive-by media cannot spend more than 30 seconds on anything that doesn't have to do with getting Donald Trump out of office, with humiliating Donald Trump. Anything that requires. Any news story that's not that, they can't even find 30 seconds for it. I'm not saying budget 30 seconds. They can't even find 30 seconds of interest for anything. You know, the drive-bys only report news they think will drive down the stock market, only report news they think will hurt the economy. Today they're telling us, for example, that Trump's crazy threats about launching cruise missiles against Assad will get us into a shooting war with Russia. They don't tell you Russia can't keep up with us in any way, shape, manner, or form if something like that were to happen, but it isn't going to happen, the odds are, which is another thing entirely. How many times have you read, for example, since December, that Trump's going to fire Mueller? Trump finally tweeted. He said he had read in the fake New York Times that he was going to fire Mueller last December. He said, if I wanted to fire Robert Mueller in December, as reported by the failing New York Times, I would have fired him by now. They keep reporting Trump's going to fire Mueller, Trump's going to fire Rosenstein, because they're trying, believe it or not, even though it's obvious to everybody. They're still goading Trump and trying to make him do something that would inflict self-harm, because all of these investigations designed to get him haven't gotten him. And despite what you might think, they're not even close yet. They don't have anything. And the best evidence we have that they don't have anything is if they had it, if they had a smoking gun, if Mueller and whoever else looking into this had found the smoking gun, it would have been leaked within days of its discovery. Now, last week, for example, Trump's tariffs were going to get us into a trade war with the Chi-Coms, but that's not happened. What happened? The Chi-Coms blinked. Well, half blinked. The Chi-Coms blinked. The Trump prevailed on this so far. The week before that, it was Trump's threats against Amazon were going to destroy Amazon and other online companies. What happens to all these stories? What happens to all these things that Trump is going to destroy, going to do, going to cause, and they never happen, and then we're on to the next one. This is a series of classic illustrations of what I mean by drive-by media. And before Trump was going to destroy Amazon, the week before that we were told that the investigations of Facebook would not only destroy Facebook, but every other online company. So one of the things that I wanted to touch on here, first of all, he's talking about the split in America, that there's two different Americas. Well, Mr. Limbaugh is absolutely wrong. There is not two different Americas. What there is what appears to be two different Americas to him and people like him, the people that are stuck behind their microphones and cannot or will not get out into the real world. What you'll notice is the way that this country is portrayed by Rush Limbaugh, by CBS, NBC, etc., CNN, and whatnot, and the way that, and by politicians, is vastly different from real life, from the life that you live each and every day. If you looked at the news, if you listen to Rush Limbaugh, if you listen to Glenn Beck, if you listen to a number of politicians, you would think that we were indeed on the verge of a civil war, that everybody was at each other's throats, that we couldn't get along for 5 seconds without engaging in some type of violent activities. But nothing could be further from the truth. The reality is that people are pleasant. I'm out and about each and every day all over Southern California, and I notice that people are friendly, people are positive, people are happy, people are polite to one another. There's some problems on the margins, you know, as you can see in the news stories and whatnot, and also as what you can see in your own life. There's automobile accidents, there's people that cut each other off in traffic, and you have those kinds of problems. But that's, again, few and far between. The vast majority of the time, people are opening doors for one another. They're saying please and thank you and good morning, good afternoon, and having pleasant conversations and being, in general, very friendly with one another. And a lot of this is because, again, you have a lot of people vying to try to shape reality. Rush Limbaugh is also engaged in that, whether he knows it or not. what he calls the drive-by media are see themselves as reality shapers, and anybody who engages them and tries to discredit them in any way, shape, or form is unwittingly engaging in or attempting to engage in a reality shaping process, rather than what Mr. Limbaugh and his ilk should be doing is taking a good hard look at their politics shapes culture mentality, realize that it's wrong. The politics does not shape our culture, but it is the other way around. It is our culture that shapes our politics. And again, the evidence of that that I use is the fact that we have public employee unions, when decades ago, when it was suggested that public employees be unionized, every politician in this country, right, left, and center, hated the idea. They couldn't stand it. No way. And the reason, because they knew it was an inherent conflict of interest. And yet, today we have public employee unions everywhere, from the post office to the police departments. And the reason that we had that, what happened culturally, was that the left used an anti-concept in order to obliterate another concept. Again, I use the term having to conflict of interest, and that was the concept that was put aside, obliterated, if you will, and the one that took over in its place was stakeholders. I don't know if you remember that, but that it was a few years ago that everybody was talking about stakeholders. Everybody was a stakeholder in this or that or the other thing. And that was the left trying to get rid of the words conflict of interest. Because again, if you can go out and try and tell people, stop using conflict of interest, but more than likely that's just not going to work. That's the hard way. The easy way is to replace that conflict of interest with something else. Get people in the habit of talking in a different way. Not only was that successful on the left, but it was even Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity were referring to people as stakeholders. Even Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity, you rarely, if ever, hear about anything you rarely hear the words conflict of interest. They got caught up in it, and they did because they don't know what they're doing. They don't know what they're talking about. And so they need to get a clue, realize that the changes in this country happen from the ground up, and that the left has been spending a whole lot of time in this country for laying the cultural groundwork for political changes, the political changes that we are seeing now. For decades and decades, there was no issue of same-sex marriage. It just wasn't an issue, just didn't happen. You didn't have all of these, and then bathroom rights, for transgender people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And how did that come about? It was a cultural shift that happened. It wasn't a policy shift. It wasn't a politician coming out and writing a law that happened first. What happened first was they had to shape the attitude of people in this country. And the problem for gays was a lot of people believed or knew that being gay was a lifestyle choice. Okay, that at some particular point people choose to be gay, live gay, and so there's no rights associated with that. It's like if I decide that I want to wear certain types of clothing, that doesn't automatically entitle me to anything in particular. Okay, I have the right to make my decisions in terms of the clothing that I wear, but it doesn't mean that anyone else has any particular extra obligations towards me because I choose to do so. However, so what the left did was they went out and got a medical study, that supposedly proved that being gay was not a lifestyle choice. It was a part of a person's biological makeup, that they were born that way, and that being gay was no different than being black, Hispanic, male, or female. And in that particular case, now we get into issues of rights. If the individual can help the fact that they are gay, then their being gay now takes on a special status in our society, and all of the laws, all of the the laws that we've had since then, anti-discrimination laws, laws supporting same-sex marriage, uh, follow the cultural implications of that particular study. So, anyways, that's my little thing for Rush Limbaugh for today. And when I come back, I will be reading from the New York City Cab Driver's Joke Book. See you in a minute. Okay, so I'm back, and again, it is I'm reading from a book called The New York City Cab Driver's Joke Book by Jim Peach. And he's a real New York City cabbie, and he's written a book with more than 400 clean jokes, dirty jokes, ethnic jokes, religious jokes, dirty Ernie jokes, jokes about musicians, bartenders, hookers, everyone. And they're jokes that he's basically heard from his fairs, because he'll ask them, have you heard any good jokes lately? And then write them down if they are pretty decent. So, okay, here we go. A guy and his girlfriend got into my cab, and I asked them if they'd heard any good jokes. The woman said, "Tell him the potato joke." The guy said, "You tell it." Then I heard them whispering back and forth, and finally the guy said, "Okay, I'll tell it, because this is sort of a guy's joke." A Polish guy's walking around the beach in France. There are many beautiful women lying in the sun, and he really wants to meet one. But try as he might, the women don't seem to be at all interested. Finally, as a last resort, he walks up to a French guy lying on the beach who is surrounded by adoring women. "Excuse me," he says, taking the guy aside, "but I've been trying to meet one of these women for about an hour now, and I just can't seem to get anywhere with them. You're French. You know these women. What do they want?" "Maybe I can help a little bit," says the Frenchman. "What you do is you go into the store, you buy a little bikini swimming suit, you walk up and down the beach, you meet girl very quickly this way." "Wow, thanks," says the guy, and off he goes to the store. He buys a skimpy red bathing suit, puts it on, and goes back to the beach. He parades up and down the beach, but still has no luck with the ladies. So he goes back to the French guy. "I'm sorry to bother you again," he says, "but I went to the store, I got the swimsuit, and I still haven't been able to meet a single girl." "Okay," says the Frenchman, "I will tell you what to do. You go to the store, you buy potato. You put potato in swimming suit and walk up and down the beach. You will meet girl very, very quickly this way." "Thanks," says the guy, and runs off to the store. He buys the potato, puts it in the swimsuit, and marches up and down the beach. Up and down he walks, but the women will hardly even look at him. After half an hour, he can't take it anymore and goes back to the Frenchman. "Look," he says, "I got the suit, I put the potato in it, and I walked up and down the beach, and still nothing. What more can I do?" "Well," says the Frenchman, "maybe I can help you a little bit. Why don't you try moving the potato to the front of the swimming suit?" Two Russian friends happen to meet in Red Square. One of them says, "By the way, did you hear that Romanov died?" "No," says the other man. "I didn't even know he'd been arrested." A big, burly, 6-foot man has a very tiny head, about the size of an orange. He goes into a bar, and everyone in the place is staring at him, and he asks the bartender for a drink. The bartender gives the man a drink, and, unable to resist, says to the man, "I'm sorry, but I really have to ask. You're such a big guy, and you have such a small head. What happened?" "Well," squeaks the man, "I was walking along the beach one day when I saw this lamp half buried in the sand. I picked it up, rubbed it, and this beautiful genie appeared. She said, 'You can have anything you want.' I said, 'Okay, let's screw.' 'But,' she said, 'genies don't screw.' So I said, 'All right, then how about a little head?'" When I was younger, we used to tell jokes about a dumb guy I was called the moron. Later in junior high school, the dumb guy jokes somehow became jokes about Italians. Then, for some reason I never understood, they later became Polish jokes. Years later, when I traveled abroad, I learned that the English have Irish jokes and vice versa. The Swedes have Norwegian jokes and vice versa. Brazilians have Portuguese jokes and so on. It's a worldwide phenomenon. It's no wonder these jokes are so popular and so often quite funny. So, intending no slur, I've included quite a few jokes that just happen as I heard them to be about Polish people. Here is one. The Pope and the Archbishop are talking, and the Archbishop happens to mention that he heard a good joke the other day. The Pope says, "Oh, I like jokes. Let me hear it." The Archbishop says, "Okay, this is a good one. There are two Polacks walking down the street," and immediately the Pope interrupts him. "Excuse me, but are you aware of the fact that I happen to be Polish?" he asks. The Archbishop is shocked. "Oh my gosh," he says, "that's right. I'm really sorry. There were two Polacks walking down the street." A man is driving across the country, and somewhere in the Midwest he stops off in a small town to have a quick beer. He parks in front of a little bar and goes in. There are about 8 or 9 locals sitting around drinking. As the traveler sits at the bar sipping his beer, he hears a man call out, "27." Everyone in the bar bursts out into laughter. Another guy calls out, "19," and again everyone laughs. The first guy calls out, "36," and once again everyone laughs. Everyone, of course, except the traveler, who's totally baffled. So he leans over to the bartender and in a low voice asks, "Hey, what's going on here? Why are these guys calling out numbers and why is everyone laughing?" "Oh," says the bartender, "you see, this is a very small town. Everyone here knows each other so well that they know everyone's jokes. So they just assign them numbers, yell out the number, and everyone knows which joke it is." "Wow," says the stranger, "that's amazing." So after a couple more beers, he turns to the room and calls out, "19." There's dead silence. He calls out, "27." Nothing. 36. He's met with more silence. So he turns to the bartender and says, "Hey, I heard those numbers were called out before and everybody laughed. What's wrong?" "Well, you know," says the bartender, "some people can tell them and some can't." And that's the end of this episode of Story Time for today. And my next episode will be tomorrow on the 17th, Tuesday the 17th. Until then, thank you very much for joining me and have a great day.